Joe was a therapist that saw lots of different patients with different problems, but little did he know that one of his patients would create a huge problem for him. Joe was having an affair with a lady called Lucy, but unluckily for Joe, one of his patients, Tom, spotted them kissing on the street one night. Joe was kicking himself how stupid he was, but his patient Tom would not give up on it. He knew he would not give up, ever, until he got what he wanted. He knew that was his MO. Joe worried about it a lot, until one session Joe had a plan. Tom had threatened Joe he would tell his wife about the affair, and Joe knew he wasn't kidding. But Joe came up with a plan that he knew would work. Joe said to Tom, "Okay, Tom, I know that I've been sitting here telling you for months about you having to control your urges, and I know that you have some crazy fantasies that would get most people locked up in prison. But I have an idea for you. I created a plan that you could live out one of your fantasies that you were always talking about. This fantasy, Tom, is what I'm talking about. This fantasy would get you locked up, and I mean locked up for a very long time. But what I'm getting at, Tom, is I can make this happen for you. I can make this fantasy become a reality with no repercussions." Tom gave Joe a curious look, wondering what he was about to say. Then he said, "What is this plan of yours, may I ask?" Joe took a breath and said, "Okay, well, I never gave in to one of my wife's fantasies, for the simple fact I know this might sound hypocritical when I'm a cheater myself, but I would never want my wife to sleep with another man. However, it is one of her fantasies to a stranger walk into her bedroom in the middle of the night and have sex with her. Now, what I am offering you is that chance to you be that stranger to walk in and have sex with my wife. But only if you promise me you won't breathe a word of my affair to her, and don't ever breathe a word to her or anyone else." Tom sat back smiling, then said, "Now, I must say, that sounds like a plan." Joe and Tom spoke for another 15 minutes, organising to him call over tomorrow night. He gave his address and time. The next session Joe was feeling a lot better, as he knew Tom loved the plan, and he had promised not to tell his wife. Now that he is giving him the chance of having sex with her. Lisa was Joe's next patient. She was beaten by her husband for months before she finally had the opportunity to leave him. Joe asked how things were going. Lisa said, "I am so jumpy at everything. I can't even walk down the street without thinking my husband is following me. It's got so bad I sleep with a loaded gun." The next day Tom was happy about what was going to happen tonight. He smiled at the fact of him getting the chance to sleep with his therapist's wife. It all felt so exciting to him, a stranger walking into her room in the dark and having sex. That night he drove over to Joe's house. The door was open, and he walked up the stairs to the room where Joe told him his wife would be. It was exactly 1 a.m, and Joe told him he would be gone out for a walk. Tom walked up to the bed and could see Joe's wife lying there. He wondered, was she pretending to be asleep, or was she really? He kneeled down next to her, about to kiss her, when her eyes opened and she screamed. She reached for her gun and shot Tom in the head. Joe looked out from his car across the street, smiling, knowing that Tom will be no more problem to him, and he drove off proud of himself for giving Tom the address of his patient Lucy, who he knew had a gun, right there beside her bed. He smiled, wondering, did she not realize she tells him every single session about having a gun by her bed? He knew she would blow Tom's head off instantly when she knew a stranger was in her house. Joe drove home and snuck back into bed. He was hoping his wife wouldn't wake up. Luckily for him, she didn't. He didn't want to have to explain anything. He was looking forward to the morning to tell his darling wife how much he loved her. Hello, my name is Jason. The night my life changed, I could sense something was wrong. I knew it was, from the smell of danger that was in the air. I knew there were people in my house. I could feel their presence. I tried to stay calm and relax, as if nothing was wrong, but I knew that I was in danger. I knew any moment that there would be a knock on my door. I couldn't hear speaking. I couldn't even hear breathing except my own, but I knew there were people in my house, and that those people would bring me so much trouble, so much pain. Suppose I could leave now, just walk out that door, or run out that door. But wait, I hear something. Then I heard a knock on the door. There is no point in hiding from what is out to get me. I opened the door and saw a policeman. I was relieved. Then I pulled out my gun and shot the policeman, relieved that at least now I know I have a head start to leave this damn place. I got into my car and drove, knowing I have to change my identity again. Those people I've shot in the head in my home would bring me so much trouble. I know they would. It's a shame I have to do it all again, somewhere else, make friends, throw a party, and kill them all. The rush. Oh, the rush of killing them. Nothing compares to it. But why do the damn police have to always ruin me trying to enjoy my hobby? Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Michael was searching for a place to stay in New York as he was offered a new job in Brooklyn. He was feeling disheartened as the more places he searched, the more he felt he couldn't afford anywhere as there was no place that met his budget. But suddenly, When he was just about to give up, something caught his eye. He had to read it twice to make sure he wasn't imagining it. There was an apartment in a building in Brooklyn, just a few blocks from where he was starting his job. He couldn't believe his luck, so he emailed the company right away, and a week later he moved in and was lying down on his bed smiling at the fact he had a place of his own in Brooklyn and was about to start a new job. He began to read a book and relax as he was starting work in a week. He was feeling tired and was about to go to sleep, so he laid the book down beside him on the bed. Then he suddenly got a start when something like a shadow moved on the wall in front of him. He looked around expecting to see someone that made the shadow, but no one was there. No one was in the room. The shadows began moving around the room. He couldn't make any sense of them. Michael found it very hard to go to sleep that night, but eventually he slipped into a deep sleep. The next night, the same thing happened. The next day he was walking down the street and past a street basketball court. He knew that the guys playing were looking at him strangely, so he asked, could he help them? One guy said to Michael, "You're that guy who moved into room 456 in the building right up the block, right?" Michael was surprised these strangers knew and replied, "Yes, how do you know that? And why do you ask?" The boy said, "Man, did you hear anything about that place? There's weird stuff happens there, that's all I'm saying." Michael was thinking about the boy's words, and instead of carrying on for his walk around the blocks like he usually did since he arrived in Brooklyn, he walked right back to his apartment. He opened his laptop and searched his address. He froze in horror when he saw a photo of a little boy and a man and woman on the screen. He guessed they were his parents. As he read on, he learned that the little boy was out playing one day when a Necronomicon book from H.P. Lovecraft was thrown out the window from stories above and hit the boy on the head. The boy suffered memory loss and trauma and was put into foster care, and his parents were found in the apartment with their bodies mutilated. There was no evidence of anyone in the apartment, and no conclusion as to what really happened to the boy's parents. Michael heard of H.P. Lovecraft before and knew about his famous monster, Cthulhu. Then suddenly shivers ran up his spine as he thought of the shadows going up and down the wall many times since he arrived in the apartment. They reminded him of what Cthulhu looks like that he saw down through the years. He remembered when he was a kid reading comics, and the character was in loads of the pages in different forms of horror. Then suddenly Michael heard a noise, and he screamed when he saw a weird-looking monster in front of him, which even though he couldn't believe his eyes, knew that it had to be Cthulhu. He screamed as the monster rushed for him, and as he backed back more and more, Michael fell through the glass out the window and fell on the ground and was killed instantly. As he was falling to his death, his memory came back. It was always Cthulhu who was making sure of Michael's fate. Michael got his job in Brooklyn and found the apartment and was drawn here by the spirit of Cthulhu, who hadn't finished him years ago. The curse only had power in the apartment. Just before he hit the ground, he had remembered He was that little boy in the photograph, so many years ago, that got knocked unconscious by the Necronomicon being thrown from his apartment. Now the job is done, and now Michael is gone.
Sarah was feeling very uptight. She hated the rain. It made her feel anxious and full of dread. She even hated the shower, as it reminded her of rain. The feeling of water on her skin might as well have just been sharp glass pouring onto her skin, cutting her. The pain felt the same. Jason was walking down a creepy, dark, lonesome road where the trees were so high and overlapping across the road it was even dark looking in the day. But it wasn't the darkness unsettled him. It was the feeling of the rain dripping off his hair onto his shoulders made him shiver in fear. He ran down the road to get home faster and in out of the rain. Lisa pulled up in her driveway and stepped out of her car. She dreaded making the short few steps in the rain. She knew most people, of course, wouldn't be afraid of getting wet, but every time it rained, she felt petrified. Jack was going for his jog when it suddenly started to rain heavy. He was 10 minutes from his house, so he began to sprint home. He had a huge irrational fear of the rain. He was panting and out of breath by the time he got home, and was relieved once he had his house door shut behind him and he was in from the rain. Mike was finished football practice and startled the other players when he freaked out on the football field. Once a heavy rain shower began, he just lost it. His friends looked, laughing, and one of the boys said, "It's only rain, it's not going to kill you." It was a rainy night, and it was the high school reunion, and everyone was enjoying themselves, except 5 people who were reluctant to even come along at all. Those 5 people were Sarah, Jason, Lisa, Jack, and Mike. They all were called into a room that had a barrel with water in it. Mike stood in the middle, and Martin, the school bully, was sitting on a chair tied to it with a cloth wrapped around his mouth. When everyone was in the room, Mike walked over and locked the door, then turned back to Martin and said, "Do you remember all the times you used to drop us into a barrel of water in the back of the school and at house parties? Where did you even get the water to put in the barrel to torture us? Do you realize the embarrassment and humiliation you put us through?" Mike pulled the cloth from Martin's mouth and he started pleading, "For God's sake, we were just kids. I'm sorry, okay?" Mike and Jack dragged him and held him over the barrel water and lowered him into it. The others looked on in horror, shouting to them pull him out, and that was enough. When Mike and Jack finally pulled him out of the water, they noticed he wasn't breathing. He had drowned to death within the first few seconds in the water. They have never spoken about what had happened on the night of the reunion to anyone outside of that room, and no one suspected them as the body was discovered in the pool the next day, and the police had it down as an accidental drowning. Mike was the one who hid the body and dumped it in the pool when he got the chance. Sarah, Jason, Lisa, Jack, and Mike all took steps towards finding out how to deal with their irrational fear of rain. They didn't realize They all shared the same fear. The doctors and psychiatrists assigned to each person had no clear idea of why they had the fear, and it was made harder for them to not know what had happened to them when they didn't even know what happened during school and during that unforgettable night at the high school reunion. After all, how would anyone know why they had a fear of rain when they did not know what had happened to them and what had happened to me? After all, who would be able to put everything together that I am haunting my killers each and every time it rains?